I'm going to show you how the two oldest emotions on Wall Street, greed and fear, are not enemies to be defeated, but instruments to be tuned, and how Jesse Livermore taught me to play them like a violin when everyone else was just making noise. When I sit at the desk before dawn, I can hear them before I see a single candle, the drumbeat of fear tapping in my chest, the siren of greed humming in my ear. They don't knock politely. They arrive dressed as headlines, disguised as hot tips, whispering, "Don't miss it." Or worse, "Don't be the last fool holding the bag." For years, I tried to exile those voices, to become the cold-blooded robot the internet promised would make me rich. It never worked. The more I denied those emotions, the more they steered me from the shadows. Then I found Jesse Livermore, not the myth, the man, and he didn't tell me to silence greed and fear. He taught me to assign them a job. Livermore said the market is a grand amplifier of human nature. Prices are just the choreography of appetite and anxiety. You don't beat human nature. You read it, ride it, and step off before it turns on you. That's the doorway to the 10 golden lessons I'm about to share. Lessons forged in the heat of panics and manias, distilled into rules that still work in a world of microseconds and machines. Because while technology changes, human nature does not. Here's the truth. My worst trades weren't born from ignorance. They were born from undirected greed masquerading as confidence and unmanaged fear pretending to be prudence. Livermore reframed both. Greed, he said, is useful when it funds patience, when you want the big swing and therefore ignore the small temptations. Fear is useful when it triggers discipline, when it forces you to define risk, honor stops, and respect the tape. Misplaced, they're poison. Properly placed, they're power. So I redesigned my morning ritual around that idea. My first chart isn't a ticker, it's a checklist. What would proof of strength look like today? Where does disproof live? If I'm wrong, how do I exit beautifully? Those answers turn fear into a risk officer and greed into a portfolio manager. Fear asks, what can kill me? Greed asks, what deserves my best size? Between them sits Livermore's law. The big money is made by waiting for the line of least resistance and then sitting tight. Waiting demands that I leash both animals. No nibbling from impulse, no flinching from noise. This film is my map of 10 lessons. 5 that refine greed into ambition, 5 that shape fear into awareness. We'll talk about why pyramiding is moral only when profits pay for it. How being early is just a romantic way to spell wrong. Why exits are not defeat but choreography, and how silence between trades is the forge where edge is tempered. You will hear Livermore's voice throughout, not as quotes pinned to posters, but as operational rules adapted to modern screens. General conditions first, leadership second, pivotal points third, then action. If you've ever chased a breakout because your heart hated missing it, or cut a winner because your stomach hated keeping it, this journey will feel like coming home. Not because it flatters you with inspiration, but because it arms you with structure. Structure is how you instruct your emotions to work for you instead of against you. Structure is how you trade like a scientist inside a storm of feeling. I'm not promising immunity from greed and fear. I'm promising fluency, so you can translate those impulses into decisions that compound. In the next section, we'll step into the inner conflict at the center of this. Why the very emotions that can guide us toward better timing also tempt us to sabotage it, and how Livermore separated signal from impulse when the tape turned loud. Comment in your trading. Which voice speaks louder right now? Greed telling you to push harder or fear telling you to pull back? Share it below and I'll tailor the coming lessons to that edge. The inner conflict or market paradox. Hook line. The cruelest paradox in trading is this. The very emotions that warn me of danger are the same ones that push me toward it. Every session opens with a tug of war inside my chest. Greed tells me I'm here to grow, size up, be bold, capture the move that pays for the quarter. Fear tells me I'm here to survive, cut risk, be careful, don't become tomorrow's cautionary tale. They're both right and both wrong, depending on who's holding the wheel. When greed drives without a map, I chase. When fear drives without a compass, I freeze. The market punishes both, recklessness and paralysis, because the tape respects timing, not temperament. Livermore saw this paradox before we had a name for it. He framed it with 2 questions that still live on my desk. What are the general conditions? And where is the line of least resistance? When conditions are hostile, breakouts failing, leaders lagging, Unmanaged greed whispers, "Get it back now." Managed fear says, "Stand down and observe." When conditions are constructive, trends clean, reactions orderly, unmanaged fear whispers, "Don't ruin the win." Managed greed says, "Press the advantage while it exists." The paradox isn't choosing greed or fear. It's assigning the right job to the right emotion at the right time. Here's how it feels from the screen. A leader approaches resistance. My greedy mind drafts the celebration speech. My fearful mind drafts the apology. The tape doesn't care. It asks for confirmation, reclaim and hold behavior, rising participation. On pushes, shallow pullbacks that refuse to break structure. If I act before that proof, greed isn't ambition. It's anticipation wearing a crown. If I refuse to act after that proof, fear isn't prudence. It's avoidance wearing a badge. Livermore's brilliance was realizing that the market pays the trader who lets price decide which emotion gets airtime. The paradox deepens around time. Greed compresses time. If not now, never. Fear distorts time. If now, disaster. Livermore neutralized both with sequence. Observe, confirm, commit, sit. Sequence stretches my world back to reality. I'm allowed to want the big move, greed, and I'm allowed to dread the big loss, fear, but only after the tape has voted. Until then, both voices are employees waiting for instructions. I used to think the solution was becoming emotionless. It isn't. The solution is role clarity. Greed funds patience by aiming me at the big swing and keeping me from nibbling. Fear enforces risk by defining exits and killing denial. Both have a place. Neither gets the mic without evidence. In that structure, greed becomes drive, fear becomes discipline, and I become a witness instead of a hostage. In the next section, I'll expose the psychological trap that turns this paradox into losses. How my brain quietly slides from observation into justification, and how Livermore's proof before conviction rule severs that slide before it drains the account. When price sits right under resistance, which voice wins in you? Jump before it runs, or wait until it proves? Tell me below so I can tune the next lesson to your default impulse. The psychological trap or core problem. The trap isn't greed or fear themselves, it's confusion. It's when the mind mistakes emotion for information. That's the invisible slope every trader walks down, often without noticing until it's too late. Here's how it begins. You start with a plan. Levels mapped, stops set, bias defined. The first red candle appears, and your brain whispers, maybe this isn't the right setup. That's not logic speaking. That's fear dressing up as analysis. Or the opposite happens. A breakout forms, your heart quickens, and you think, this one looks even better than the plan. That's greed masquerading as intuition. Both are self-talk aimed not at the market, but at avoiding discomfort. Livermore called this the operator's blindness. He said a trader sees the market clearly only when detached, but loses sight the moment personal desire enters the tape. Every mistake I've ever made was born not from bad charts, but from blurred perception, seeing what I wanted, not what was there. The deeper trap is rationalization. When fear drives a premature exit, you call it prudence. When greed drives an oversized entry, you label it conviction. The words feel noble, but the motive is self-protection, not strategy. Livermore wrote that the market punishes self-deception faster than ignorance because it makes you confident in the wrong direction. He believed that the market's greatest lesson was impersonality. Prices don't care about your needs. They reveal collective behavior. Once you personalize a trade, make it about being right, redeeming a loss, or proving your edge, you hand your emotions the steering wheel. From that moment, analysis becomes narrative. The brain collects only confirming evidence, filters out contradiction, and suddenly you're not reading the tape, you're defending a thesis. Modern traders fall into the same pattern, just faster. Screens, alerts, and algorithms amplify every twitch of emotion. A flicker of red on the P&L screen can trigger a cascade of decisions meant to fix the feeling rather than the trade. The real loss isn't money, it's objectivity. Livermore broke that pattern by keeping a separation between judgment and action. He allowed emotions to appear, but refused to let them translate directly into movement. His rule was simple. Wait for the market to confirm your belief. That pause is the antidote to the trap. It forces thought to catch up with impulse. So the core problem isn't emotional reaction, it's emotional immediacy. The gap between thought and action is where discipline lives. Most traders close that gap too quickly. Livermore widened it deliberately. In the next section, I'll share how he reframed this entire dilemma, not by suppressing emotion, but by designing a system where emotion became signal instead of sabotage. That perspective was his genius, and it's the bridge from chaos to control. Livermore's perspective on the situation. Jesse Livermore understood that emotion couldn't be eliminated from trading. It had to be channeled. He saw greed and fear not as moral flaws, but as data points about human behavior. To him, markets were not mathematical puzzles. They were theaters of psychology, where the same play ran every decade with new actors. The props, stocks, commodities, crypto, whatever came next, didn't matter. What mattered was the rhythm of collective emotion. Livermore's approach was simple but merciless. Observe how crowds behave under pressure. When everyone felt euphoric, he felt cautious. When panic filled the air, he felt alert. He called this listening to the market's tone. It wasn't contrarianism for its own sake. It was calibration. He knew the market's emotional tone always swung too far. Greed stretched prices beyond value. Fear pushed them below reason. His edge was not in predicting when emotion would appear, but in recognizing when it had reached exhaustion. He once wrote that, "The market is never wrong, opinions often are." That single sentence reframes everything. It meant that price itself was the final judge. Livermore didn't argue with it, didn't question it, and never begged it to behave differently. Instead, he used price as a translator for mass emotion. When prices broke resistance with volume, he didn't see momentum. He saw greed expressing itself through buying pressure. When prices collapsed below support, he didn't see weakness. He saw fear manifesting through liquidation. He was watching emotion written in numbers. This is why his rules often sound contradictory to modern traders. He would say, follow the trend, but also, be suspicious when it looks too easy. What he meant was to ride emotion while it's expanding, and exit when emotion becomes hysteria. In both cases, awareness mattered more than analysis. He once described the market as a living organism, one that breathes, contracts, and sighs with every uptick and downtick. The successful trader, he said, must synchronize his pulse with it, not fight against it. Livermore built his entire trading life on 3 emotional truths. Greed blinds before it enriches. Fear paralyzes before it protects. Patience disciplines both. That third truth was his weapon. Patience wasn't passive for him. It was an active waiting, a constant measurement of crowd behavior. When traders around him were desperate to act, he reminded himself, there's a time to buy, a time to sell, and a time to go fishing. He wasn't avoiding the market. He was conserving energy for the moment when both greed and fear tipped the balance of probability in his favor. To Livermore, the market's emotional cycle was as reliable as gravity. First comes disbelief, then acceptance, then greed, then denial, then fear, and finally despair. Every major move in history followed this path. He didn't need indicators to tell him where he was. He needed emotional awareness. The crowd's behavior told him what phase the market was in, and that told him what role he should play, participant or observer. Modern traders often think of psychology as self-help. Livermore treated it as strategy. Emotional control wasn't about staying calm. It was about reading collective sentiment better than anyone else and positioning accordingly. That's why his greatest trades weren't just technical, they were psychological predictions of what the majority would feel next. In the next section, I'll bring this perspective to life with a real-world example, one of Livermore's most remarkable trades, showing how he turned the chaos of fear and greed into the clarity of conviction. In 1907, the market wasn't just trembling, it was in full collapse. Panic had taken hold. Banks were failing, liquidity was evaporating, and Wall Street was gripped by pure, unfiltered fear. It was one of the most chaotic times in financial history. And in the middle of that storm, Jesse Livermore did something that separated him from the crowd. He stayed calm enough to listen to what fear was saying. Most traders that year were trying to buy dips. Believing every plunge was the bottom, they couldn't accept that the market had turned against them. Livermore, however, read the emotional temperature differently. He saw not opportunity but denial. He knew from experience that when fear grows, it doesn't vanish overnight. It compounds. It feeds on itself until exhaustion. So while others were hoping for rebounds, Livermore shorted the market. He didn't guess. He waited. He observed the tape, volume expanding on down moves, rallies dying faster each day. Every bounce lacked conviction. Every sell-off grew stronger. The market wasn't finding support, it was revealing panic. That was his confirmation. His positions grew with each sign that fear was still spreading. When the full crash came, he wasn't surprised. He was prepared. And as fortunes were wiped out around him, Livermore made one of the greatest profits of his career. But what mattered more than the money was the process. He later said he didn't feel excitement or joy, only clarity. He had learned that in moments of chaos, emotion becomes predictable. Fear doesn't move randomly, it follows a pattern. It begins with disbelief, grows into concern, peaks in panic, and ends in capitulation. Livermore timed that pattern not through equations, but through patience and observation. He once remarked, "The market does not beat them. They beat themselves because they can't sit still." That ability to sit still, to wait for the proof of fear's peak, is what saved him. And it's the same discipline that defines great traders today. Because fear doesn't just exist on the chart, it lives inside us. Most traders sell not when the market breaks, but when their nerves do. Livermore used that as a timing tool. When his own stomach twisted, he took that as a sign that others felt the same, and that meant the move was almost over. He understood that emotion was a market indicator. Not a flaw to erase, but a signal to read. Greed and fear were like weather patterns, each one announcing the next change in climate. And because he studied those emotional cycles with the same seriousness others gave to numbers, he could stay composed when everyone else surrendered to panic. That 1907 crash didn't just make Livermore rich, it made him certain that mastering emotion was the ultimate edge. The lesson he took from that period became the foundation for the rules he lived by afterward. And those rules, those emotional guardrails, turned his understanding of fear and greed into a repeatable process. In the next section, I'll walk you through what happened after that victory, how success itself became a new kind of test, how greed returned disguised as confidence, and how Livermore faced the emotional low point that would redefine his philosophy forever. After the triumph of 1907, Jesse Livermore's confidence turned into something subtler and more dangerous: certainty. Success has a way of rewriting your emotional script. When you win big, you start believing you've cracked the code, that you've outgrown the rules that once protected you. That's what happened to Livermore. He had mastered fear during the crash, but now greed crept back in wearing the disguise of experience. In the years that followed, Livermore entered markets with a conviction so strong it blinded him. He had seen the crowd panic before, he had predicted disaster, and he had profited from it. Now he believed he could read the tape in every condition, that his instinct had become infallible. But the market, as he often said, has no loyalty, not even to its most brilliant students. The same greed that drives ambition can quietly turn into overconfidence, and that's when even the greatest traders lose their edge. When the market began to move sideways, Livermore didn't adapt. Instead of waiting for clear confirmation, he began anticipating again, jumping into trades early, scaling too quickly, assuming the market would eventually reward him for being right. But the tape has no memory. His trades began to fail one after another. The confidence that once protected him turned into an anchor that dragged him down. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing objectivity. That's when Livermore realized something profound. The hardest time to stay disciplined isn't during loss, it's after success. Fear keeps you cautious when you're losing. Greed seduces you when you're winning. He began to see that every peak in his equity curve was also a peak in emotional vulnerability. The very sense of invincibility that success created was the same. Emotion that precedes failure. He wrote later that, "The big money is not made in the buying or selling, it's made in the waiting." That waiting wasn't just about patience, it was about humility. He had to relearn what he already knew, that no one ever conquers the market. The best you can do is harmonize with it, and harmony requires constant self-awareness. In one of his most reflective moments, Livermore confessed that his losses taught him more about himself than his wins ever did. They exposed his blind spots, the quiet arrogance that comes from thinking you can bend the market to your will. The turning point came when he accepted that discipline isn't a skill you master once. It's a practice you renew daily. Every morning you start again, empty, attentive, uncertain. That was his emotional rebirth. The man who once believed he could outthink the market now sought to outweight it. His greed didn't vanish. It evolved into a drive for mastery instead of money. His fear didn't paralyze. It reminded him to respect every setup, no matter how certain it seemed. That transformation didn't just rebuild Livermore's fortune, it rebuilt his mind. It marked the moment when trading became less about profits and more about psychological alignment. From that low point, his greatest philosophy was born, the rules that turned emotional chaos into composure. In the next section, I'll break down those rules, the precise mental framework Livermore used to keep greed and fear in balance, and how those timeless lessons still shape the mindset of every great trader today. Livermore's breakthrough rule or lesson. When Jesse Livermore rebuilt his philosophy after those humbling losses, he didn't create a complicated system or invent new indicators. He went back to something simple, almost ancient, a single guiding principle that every other rule could be traced back to. Trade only when the market confirms your belief. That was his breakthrough. Confirmation wasn't about seeking permission, it was about protecting clarity. Livermore realized that greed always wants to act before confirmation, and fear always wants to act after it. The only way to neutralize both was to let the market itself decide when to move. Price became his compass, volume his language, and patience his gatekeeper. This rule turned emotion into structure. When greed whispered, "You'll miss it," he would wait for confirmation, because proof was more valuable than prediction. When fear murmured, "You'll lose it all," he would stay calm, because proof would reveal whether danger was real or imagined. Every decision passed through the same filter. Has the market confirmed it? He formalized this mindset into a process. First, observe the general conditions. Are markets trending or unstable? Then, identify leadership. Where is money flowing? Next, define the line of least resistance, the path the market naturally wants to follow. Only after those 3 steps did Livermore act, and even then he sized up gradually, allowing each layer of confirmation to justify the next. This wasn't hesitation, it was precision. His patience wasn't passive. It was tactical. The longer he waited, the more the market revealed who was in control, buyers or sellers, conviction or confusion. Waiting became a form of intelligence. It told him when the crowd was emotional and when it was rational. He also had another rule that paired with confirmation. Never average a losing trade. That was the second half of his emotional discipline. When he was wrong, he didn't fight it. He let fear do its job, protect capital. He saw averaging down as a form of denial, a refusal to admit the tape had changed. To Livermore, accepting loss wasn't weakness. It was respect for truth. And finally, there was his rule of silence. After a series of trades, whether wins or losses, he would step away and disconnect completely. This was his reset mechanism. He believed that emotional residue, either euphoria or frustration, clouded judgment more than any external factor. Silence cleared the noise. It brought him back to balance, ready to see the market fresh again. Livermore's breakthrough wasn't about perfection. It was about rhythm. He learned when to let greed drive ambition and when to let fear enforce discipline. But above all, he learned that only the market has the right to confirm or deny a belief. Every trader who ignores that truth eventually learns it the hard way. But those who respect it, those who wait for the evidence, find something Livermore discovered long before algorithms ever existed. That patience, when organized into a process, becomes the most aggressive strategy of all. In the next section, I'll explore how these lessons extend far beyond Livermore's era, how the same emotional mechanics play out in modern markets, and how traders today can apply his timeless approach in a world that moves at lightning speed. How it applies to modern traders. In today's markets, everything moves faster. Information, execution, even emotion. The same fear and greed Livermore studied on the trading floor now live inside digital charts, social media feeds, and algorithmic reactions measured in milliseconds. Yet beneath all the speed, human behavior hasn't changed. The trader who panics in a flash crash and the one who chased the tulip bubble centuries ago are driven by the same impulses. The context evolves, but the psychology repeats. Livermore's philosophy fits modern trading perfectly because it isn't about tools. It's about timing the mind. The confirmation rule is more relevant now than ever. In a world flooded with opinions, noise, and false signals, waiting for the market's proof before committing becomes the trader's strongest edge. Algorithms may act instantly, but humans can still win by doing what machines can't. Observe emotional context. Think about how modern traders operate. Every morning starts with a flood of alerts, analysts, and headlines. The temptation to act is constant. Greed is amplified by FOMO, fear of missing out. Fear, in turn, is amplified by overexposure, fear of losing what's already in play. Livermore's process cuts straight through this noise. He'd remind you that volatility doesn't create opportunity, confirmation does. No move, no matter how sharp, deserves your capital until the market proves its intention. For retail traders, that means filtering setups through proof instead of prediction. Don't buy a stock because someone online calls it a momentum play. Watch its behavior. Does volume expand in the direction of the move? Does the market support or reject it? Is strength spreading to similar names, or is it isolated noise? Livermore would call that tape character, the difference between real motion and emotional motion. For professionals and algorithmic traders, Livermore's lesson translates into structure. Backtests and models only matter if they're confirmed by live behavior. Markets evolve. No algorithm is forever. Confirmation is the human element that keeps technology adaptive. Even the most complex trading systems benefit from Livermore's mindset. React, don't predict. Validate, don't assume. And for investors, the ones holding positions for weeks, months, or years, the rule still stands. The market rewards patience, but not blind patience. Livermore never held a losing position hoping it would turn. He held only when the market confirmed his thesis again and again. Modern investors can do the same. Review fundamentals, yes, but trust price behavior as the final judge. What Livermore taught wasn't just market strategy. It was emotional architecture. Confirmation protects you from yourself. It's how you resist the urge to overtrade in euphoria or overreact in panic. It's how you measure conviction with proof instead of feeling. And in a time where trading has become as psychological as it is technical, his rules aren't outdated. They're essential. His mindset turns every trader into a student of behavioral rhythm. You begin to see the market as he did, not as a battlefield of random moves, but as a mirror reflecting collective emotion. Once you understand that, the speed of modern trading no longer intimidates you. You stop chasing movement and start tracking meaning. In the next few minutes, I'll break down how to practically implement Livermore's emotional discipline step by step, how to translate philosophy into a modern trading process you can use every day, from pre-market preparation to execution and post-trade reflection. Step-by-step practical implementation. Applying Livermore's principles in modern trading begins with transforming emotion into structure. The goal isn't to suppress fear or greed, but to guide them into specific functions. Livermore didn't rely on luck or instinct. He built routines that converted emotion into awareness and awareness into decision-making. The first step is preparation. Every trading day should begin long before the market opens. Livermore always said the biggest money is made sitting and waiting. Preparation means defining what you're waiting for. Review broader market conditions, index trends, sector rotations, volatility levels. When the environment is unstable, your primary job is observation, not execution. You're not trying to force a trade. You're trying to align with momentum once it's confirmed. Modern traders can replicate this by marking key price zones where confirmation will matter most. The second step is observation. Livermore read the tape. We read screens. He watched for how price and volume behaved under pressure. You can do the same by noting how assets react to key levels. Do they accelerate or hesitate? Do strong stocks lead the move or fade early? Observation is emotional insulation. It lets you feel the market without reacting to it. The third step is confirmation. This is the moment where patience meets evidence. In Livermore's world, confirmation was when the market proved your bias correct through sustained strength, not fleeting spikes. In today's markets, that means waiting for breakout retests, clean trend continuation, or volume confirmation. The idea is to let proof replace prediction. The fourth step is execution. Once confirmation appears, act decisively but measured. Livermore built positions gradually, testing with smaller size before pyramiding. His logic was that the market should pay for his risk. Modern traders can do the same. Start small, scale only when the trade continues to confirm. Execution is where greed must stay disciplined. Position sizing should always follow validation, not anticipation. The fifth step is review and reflection. After every session, Livermore evaluated not just his trades, but his state of mind. Did he act from proof or from impulse? Did he let the tape lead or did he try to lead it? Modern traders can mirror this by journaling both data and emotion. Track setups, yes, but also note the moments of hesitation or overconfidence. That's where improvement hides. And finally, the sixth step, reset. Livermore knew emotional residue is dangerous. Wins create overconfidence, losses create hesitation. Either one distorts perception. He would deliberately disconnect from markets, walk, read, or simply rest. This emotional cooling period ensures clarity when returning. In today's hyper-connected world, this is even more important. Step away regularly to keep perspective. This structure transforms trading from reaction into rhythm. Preparation trains awareness. Observation protects patience. Confirmation filters emotion. Execution expresses conviction. Reflection reinforces discipline. And reset restores clarity. Together, they embody Livermore's greatest lesson. Control comes not from rigidity, but from ritual. In the final section, I'll bring these lessons full circle. How mastering fear and greed isn't just about markets, but about mastering the self behind the trade, the quiet mind inside the storm. There's a moment at the end of every trading day when the screens dim and the noise dissolves into a kind of gray quiet. In that quiet, I take inventory, not of dollars, but of discipline. Did I let greed pull me forward without a map, or did I assign it a role and tell it to fund my patience? Did I let fear drag me backward into hesitation, or did I seat it at risk control and ask it to guard my exits? Jesse Livermore taught me that the market is a mirror. It reflects not the person we claim to be, but the person we are under pressure. And the work of a trader, the real work, is to become someone worth reflecting. Greed and fear will always be in the room. They are constants. What changes is who commands them. Livermore's gift was not immunity from emotion. It was mastery through structure. He didn't audition feelings. He assigned them jobs. Greed was ambition with guardrails, used to aim at the big swing, to pyramid only when profits paid. Fear was discipline with purpose, used to frame risk, honor disproof, and shut down denial before denial shut down the account. Between them stood patience, and patience wasn't a halo, it was a habit. It turned waiting into intelligence and confirmation into courage. When I trade inside that architecture, I don't feel heroic. I feel inevitable. The entry isn't a gamble, it's a response. The exit isn't an apology, it's choreography. I stop trying to outshout the crowd and start listening for the line of least resistance, where price, volume, and context say the same sentence at the same time. That's when I pull the trigger with a calm I didn't have in my early career. A calm that only arrives when proof carries the weight that ego used to carry. Livermore's 10 golden lessons reduced to one golden posture. Humble enough to wait, disciplined enough to act, and honest enough to stop. The rest is repetition, days of quiet study punctuated by minutes of decisive action. That rhythm builds an equity curve made not just of profits, but of principles. And principles compound longer than money ever will. If there's a final image to hold, it's this. A trader sitting in silence, watching the tape breathe, with two old companions at his shoulders. Greed leans in and asks, how big could this become if you're right? Fear leans in and asks, what ends this campaign if you're wrong? I nod to both, then put my finger on the mouse only when the market answers both questions for me. That is Livermore's room. That is our craft. Comment hook. Which of Livermore's lessons will you assign a job to tomorrow? Greed to fund patience or fear to enforce exits? Drop your answer below. I'll help you translate it into one rule you can tape to your monitor.